Okay, hey everyone, welcome to the Adult and NA Mentor Live Chat. I am McKelle George. I'm filling in for Nikki Roberti today, and I'm super excited to talk with these awesome adult mentors. I am a YA mentor myself. My debut, Speakeasy Speak Love, comes out from HarperCollins this September, which is really soon, and I'm both nauseatingly nervous and excited. And I am going to let these mentors introduce themselves to you guys. So Carrie, if you want to start.
Hi, great. Thank you, McKelle. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's so great to be here again tonight. This is my second year mentoring, and I'm really excited to be back in the Pitch Horse community. I write historical fiction and also some literary short stories, but mostly historical fiction. I'm represented by Shannon Hassan of Marcel Lyon, and I am looking for historical fiction, fantasy with a literary feel, and ghost stories with literary feel. And that's it. E.B.
Okay, I'm E.B. Wheeler, Emily, and I write historical fiction. I've done both YA and adult, but I mentor in adult and mainly looking for historical fiction.
My name's Heather. This is my second year of being a Pitch Wars mentor. I'm an author through Sourcebooks Casablanca. I have one book released, a contemporary new adult romance in February, and another one coming out in November. Let's see. I'm represented by Stacey Donahue of Donahue Literary. And this year I am co-mentoring with Jessica Calla, and we are both looking for all things romance and kissing books, all that good stuff. We're not picky about subgenres.
Hi, I'm Katrina, and I write literary fiction that has a little bit of a commercial flavor to it. I am represented by Stacia Decker of Danielle Carlson and Lerner, and my debut comes out next fall from MCD Books, which is an imprint of Farrar Straus Giroux. I'm going to be looking for literary fiction that has some genre crossover. So the example I gave in my wish list was a literary character study mixed with a mystery kind of plot. I'm also very interested in LGBTQ protagonists as well as Latinx main characters. So, hi everybody.
Hi, I'm Sandi Ward, and my debut novel, The Astonishing Thing, will be out October 31st from Kensington Books. My agent is Stacy Testa at Writers House. And what I'm looking for is general fiction. That's my book is general fiction, or sometimes called women's fiction. And any book that'd be shelved general fiction at the bookstore would be in my wheelhouse.
McKelle, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, wait, can you hear me now? Sorry, you guys. I thought I unmuted it. Okay. Well, I'm going to repeat that whole question again since I was just mouthing it. Okay. So we got a question from Twitter, which I think is a good one to lead into because it's about the submission process and how you guys go about that as mentors. So MJ Marshall wanted to know the average number of submissions that you guys get, and also if you plan to read and ask for pages before the window closes, and how quickly you ask for pages, and if you're still asking for pages even right before that. So kind of, E.B., if you want to start with this one, kind of talk about, what your inbox looks like during the submission period.
Okay, I want to say last year, I know I had over 100, so it's a lot to read through. And I I might have requested some pages before the submission window closed, but I was requesting pages after that for a while because it took me a while to get through everything. I read everything that comes into my inbox, and so I can't get through it in just those few days. So just because the submission window is closed doesn't, if you haven't heard, I haven't had any requests for pages yet, I wouldn't give up hope quite that soon because it does take us a little while. Or at least it took me a little while to get through everything.
Sorry. Let's see. Last year I had about 150 subs, and I was requesting pages before the submission window closed all the way up until like the last couple of days before I had to pick somebody. There was just so much goodness in there, and I couldn't decide. And it's I read everything, and I read it twice, sometimes 3 times, depending. So, and I will request fulls instead of partials because I figured, you know, if I wanted something and I read it halfway, you know, I don't necessarily have to ask for the full thing, or you know what I mean. I hope.
This is my first year mentoring, so I have no idea what my inbox is going to look like in terms of submissions. But I do plan to request pages for the queries that sound super interesting. And I imagine that, as the other mentors have said, that can't happen immediately. So I'll probably be requesting beyond the submission window.
I think, well, this is also my first year mentoring, so I don't know exactly how many submissions to expect. I would think if I'm very interested, I would probably first request a synopsis because I like to get a quick overview of the entire plot before making a judgment. I think it's important to see what the ending is going to look like, what the character's journey is going to look like before making a final decision. I'm sure whether I have 2 to choose from or 200, it's going to be very difficult to pick just one. And I think there'll probably be many that look excellent. And so the more information I have, the better. I probably would request a full, but of course you're not going to have time to read a full book. So the synopsis for me, I think, would be very helpful. And then we'll see how far I get into each. I suppose it'll be time dependent how much I get to read.
And so this is my second year, and last year I got a little over 110 submissions. And I hope I'm a little bit more disciplined this year than I was last year. There's so much, like Sandi was saying, there's so much wonderful in the inbox that it was really hard to restrain myself from requesting stuff quickly, but I was also definitely requesting pretty close to the deadline that we had to decide by. And in my case, I'm going to ask for a synopsis and a full. That way, theoretically, you won't have to hear from me again. You never know, I might end up having some questions. And it usually takes me, well, I should say last year at least, it took me well past the close of submission to start requesting stuff because I've got this complicated system of tagging and categorizing and trying to at least limit somewhat the fulls that I request. But oh my gosh, you know, if it's anything like last year, y'all are a bunch of talented writers and it's pretty hard to pick. So that's it for me.
Awesome. So kind of piggybacking off of that last question, and Heather, we'll start with you, is what is the #1 thing that you look for and in a submission? Yeah.
The first thing I usually look for is the voice. Is it drawing me in? Is it, you know, somebody I can relate to? Is it somebody I, you know, can find myself feeling for? Even within those first few pages, you have to be able to connect to the voice and the character. So some of the main things I look for. Probably another thing is tension in the characters, especially in romance. You know, the characters don't have to meet in that first chapter, but sometimes you have to feel, you know, just the characters' struggles already within the first chapter. So I look for that.
I'm kind of immediately drawn in by writing style, by the prose. And after that, I want to know that there's a promising story there, even something that's only hinted at in the first few pages, but having the sense that the story is going to have a lot of depth and enough to it to be contents for a full novel. So it would be writing style and then kind of the establishment of the hook of the story pretty early on as well.
Yeah, I think when I actually look at manuscripts, probably I'll be looking for the story flow, just to see if the sentences are flowing, the writing style is fluid, and also to see if I get emotionally hooked, to see if I get, you know, I think you get that feeling when you're really connecting with a story. So that's what I'll be looking for.
So it's really hard to explain the subjective process of taste. And, you know, ultimately, I think all of us are just going to fall in love with something. But I thought maybe what I would do to try to explain what is it that I like is refer to the two mentees that I picked last year and share a little bit about their submissions. And I guess before I go into that, I will just say, looking at least for the historical fiction side of my wish list, the first thing that's going to catch my attention is the concept. Is this a story I haven't heard before? And then, like everybody else said, the execution. Does it draw you in? But I know that for you all listening, just saying the execution is very helpful. So I thought I would just share the first sentence from one of my mentees last year. She actually started off with a prologue, which interestingly, you know, is kind of breaking one of the rules. But she made it work. This is an adult fantasy novel. Smoke from the last of the fires, sulfur from the blunderbusses, blood and offal and decay, all perfumed the early evening air. And I will note that I wrote in my wish list that I love stories about war, so that immediately drew me in, like this very literally visceral scene that makes you want to know what's going on.
I think for me, it is hard to put my finger on it. There's the character, I think, is going to be really important, though, that I connect with the characters, that emotional connection, and the tension that someone else mentioned as well, that kind of draws you along and makes you want to know what's going to happen with them. But last year, when it came down to my few favorites, they all kind of had those elements, and ultimately the one I picked was one that I felt excited about and felt like I liked the story, and I thought, oh, I know how to make this better. And that was what I was really excited about, was it was a good story, and it was a good story that I personally felt like I could make it even better. And so that's a hard thing for potential mentees, I guess, there's no way for them to control that. It is subjective, but that's how I ultimately made my decision.
Okay, great. So we have another question from Twitter from Kit, and she wants to know where you guys found, where and how you found your best CPs. So Katrina, we'll start with you.
Sure. I spent a lot of time on the website Absolute Right when I was first writing and querying. So my debut is actually my third finished novel. It took 2 attempts to get there. And I met a person in Query Letter critique threads who seemed really cool, and we hit it off and ended up swapping manuscripts, and that was about 6 years ago, and she's one of my best friends now. So she's my #1 critique partner, and I got super lucky finding her. And it was just through participating in the writing community of Absolute Right and sharing each other's work and time with the critiquing of queries.
So I'll be honest, I don't think I don't have any critique partners. I never even heard the term CP until recently. I didn't know what that was, but I assume that's other authors that you would share your work with. I've worked with professional editors, though, who have been super helpful, including author Susan Breen, who's a mystery writer, and she also teaches creative writing. So you can check out her website. I believe it's susanjbreen.com, and she's a great editor. Also, my agent, Stacy, is a terrific editor, so she's helped me a lot.
My critique partners have come through a combination of in-person writing groups. I've participated in 3-ish in-person writing groups over the years and have picked up some of the wonderful people that I've met in the course of that experience. And then also from Pitch Wars. I have one CP who actually, when I was a mentee hopeful a couple years ago, one of the mentors at the time matched us up together, and we've since swapped manuscripts, and I really love working with her. And then now my mentees from last year I consider CPs. So, you know, it's a constantly growing thing, and I think Pitch Wars is a great place to meet critique partners, you know, whether you're doing it now in the pre-submission process or even later on. A lot of times, a lot of mentors will do a critique partner matchup.
My critique partners I met at in-person writing groups as well. I've been part of the same group for like 4 or 5 years now, and some of us have kind of, in addition to just what we do in our writing group, which is usually just chapters, some of us have kind of branched off and started swapping manuscripts and doing beta reading, and they are awesome. I love my critique partners, and I feel like I lucked out to find really good ones so quickly through a writing group.
I met my critique partners through Twitter. I spend a lot of time on there, and that's a horrible thing to admit, but I do. And I just found them through different, you know, my first her name is Katrina, and she actually just asked me if we wanted to swap pages, and ever since, you know, it was right before Pitch Wars, a couple of years before that we really met. And then another one, I just asked her if she would just read for me. We'd been talking as friends on social media for a little while, and so social media is a great place to meet your critique partners if you don't have local groups to join. So.
Okay, so we've got, there's kind of a more technical question on the Pitch Wars Twitter feed, and then there's another one related to it that I'll tag on. So someone asked if mentors are allowed to take on more than one mentee, and typically no. So each mentor is allowed one, but there's a lot of, Brenda Drake does a lot of bonus rounds. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the mentor for sure gets to get their extra mentee. It means that they can kind of put themselves into the drawing to be like, I would like to be considered, and then Brenda will maybe choose like a couple lucky mentors who get to take on 2 instead of 1. But typically it's just 1 for sure, and then a couple of people will get to have bonus mentees or maybe a prize winner or something like that. But related to that question for you guys, Marika wanted to know, how likely are you to pass a manuscript along to another mentor if it's good but it's not right for you? And then Sandi, I'll let you answer that one first.
Okay, this is my first year as a mentor, so I haven't been through that experience before. You know, there's a couple of writers participating who I've answered their questions, and I think that their work looks very promising, and I don't know if it will be coming my way or not, where, you know, I would hope that they get chosen by someone already, but I don't know how it works where you can swap with other mentors, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Last year we weren't allowed to swap manuscripts, so this, even though this is my second year mentoring, this is kind of terra incognita for me as well. I will say though, I can imagine that the swapping would probably be limited, partially because, you know, there's a lot of mentors, but there's only a few whom I think I have a good sense for their tastes. So, and also the submission period is so incredibly manic. You're completely overwhelmed. I mean, I think Laura one of the other adult mentors said she read 4,000 or 5,000 pages last year, and I had at one point calculated it. It was something along those lines for me too. I mean, it's thousands of pages. So the idea of being able to pull yourself out of that to think about somebody else's tastes, you know, it might happen if I already know at the top of my mind, you know, what Katrina's interested in. I think I have a good sense for her wish list. So if something came along that I thought was awesome, I might send it to her. But, you know, generally it's going to be pretty tough. So I think that's why you all ought to make sure to really do your homework when you're looking at the mentees, at the mentors, sorry. That's it.
Yeah, I would agree with what Carrie said, that if swapping is allowed, and if I knew something was exactly what somebody might be looking for, then maybe I would think to do that. But it is a busy time period, and we're all busy, and we're all maybe not always sure exactly what other people are looking for. So it's best to try to find the right people in the first place.
Yeah, like Carrie and EB said, last year we weren't able to swap manuscripts with other mentors, so I really don't know how that's going to work. I do have several close friends that are mentoring too, and I kind of know what they like to read. So if I find something that's just not right for me, I'll ask them if they're looking for something like what this is or whatever. So that's probably how it will look from my perspective.
I don't have much to add to what everybody said. Again, I'm a first-year mentor, so I'm just going to kind of do what we're allowed to do and pass things on if I'm able. But otherwise, make sure I'm following the rules as best as I can.
Yeah, great. So just so you guys know, it is allowed this year to swap potential mentees. Last year it wasn't because people paid for extra and for the ability to sub to extra mentors. So we didn't feel it was fair to swap if people were paying for extra chances. But this year you can still donate if you want to do those extra entries, which like a couple mentors brought up. It's really, I mean, your best bet is to sub to the right mentor and do your research, and because not everyone has time to like talk about that. But it is allowed this year to swap if mentors want to, and if they have that capacity, and if they're talking to everyone. But again, your best bet is to research and do it first. So our next question is from Bonnie Blaylock, and this is kind of an open-ended question, so I'll let anyone take it who represents this. She asks, can someone who requests this to explain their definition of speculative fiction?
I don't usually.
Are any?
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah. Go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. It's not on the top of the list of things I'd be looking for, since I'm mostly interested in historical. But usually, speculative fiction means science fiction, fantasy, possibly horror. Things that kind of ask a question of what if the world was a little different than it is now? You know, what if magic existed? What if this new technology existed? What if, you know, if it's horror, what if this really scary person who's out to get you, or some supernatural entity existed? And then it would become speculative fiction, because it's about what if things were a little bit different than they are in the realistic world that we know.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to add anything to Evie's definition?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Just to add another maybe historical example, you know, what if the Nazis won World War II, I think is a common speculative premise. And then the writer would extend that premise, you know, into say 2050. What would the world look like if the Nazis had won 100 years earlier? And then that's where we are. So some sort of what if, but I think the difference between speculative and say a straight up fantasy or straight up sci-fi is that it's very clearly tethered to our current world. And asking the question from the context of our current world. But, you know, honestly, like all of these genres are very subjective. And so, of course, you're going to find lots of gray areas between. And that's the maddening and also wonderful thing about literature. So.
Yes, for sure. I think those definitions are really great. And I've seen some mentees kind of use speculative fiction as a catch-all umbrella, when most often you can narrow it down to either science fiction or fantasy or urban fantasy or some kind of one of those. And if it is strictly speculative fiction, I think it kind of falls into those categories that Carrie and Evie both brought up. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay, so this next question is kind of fun. It's from L. Ryan Storms, and he wants to know, who are some of your favorite antagonists and why? He wants to hear about the villains. And I guess, Carrie, we'll start with you.
Oh man, that's really hard. I don't usually think in terms of villains. Let's think. I don't know. I want to take a pass. I want someone else to go first, and then I'll answer.
I love villains, so I'll go first on this one. I love a good bad guy, and especially one where they're relatable. I don't want to see a flat 2D bad guy who's just bad because he's bad. I want a bad guy who has a reason for it. And so, especially with like Magneto from X-Men. Speaking of speculative fiction, Magneto is an awesome villain because you can sympathize with him. You could almost agree with him if you just twisted your mind a little bit. He'd be the good guy, right? And so I think that's what makes a villain really interesting, and that's what makes a story interesting, because if your protagonist is up against an antagonist like that, it's going to push him or her more as well.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, sorry. My favorite villain is not even in a book. He's Negan from The Walking Dead. There's something fascinating about that man and what goes on in his head, and he's the guy that you hate to love. So that's my favorite.
I'm going to go kind of general with my answer instead of specific, and say that I really like anti-heroes and anti-heroines. So the main character, who's also kind of the villain, any characters that have a lot of gray areas where they're probably doing something wrong but have a justification for it in their own mind. I think those are the characters that can make very fascinating character studies, which are kind of the things I'm hoping to see in submissions. And just getting into their thought processes and how they experience their actions is very fascinating to me. So I kind of love the villainous main character who's just doing their life and living it, but maybe not in the best way.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at general fiction, which is really my genre, the type of villains that I prefer is going to be, to give an example, someone more like Snape than Voldemort. You know, I don't want to see someone who's, you know, just all bad or all good. The most interesting characters are going to be those that fall into the shades of gray. So there might be a character, and this, I think, it basically echoes what other people have said, is you want a villain who you can somewhat relate to, who you can understand, where you can see their motivation. And I think it's more interesting when you have an antagonist that maybe has some, you know, redeeming qualities. And in the same way, you want your protagonist to have some flaws and to have some faults. And to me, that's the most interesting.
You know, I get a chance to redeem myself, and I'm going to explain why I was so deer in the headlights, because I think in a lot of times, and for me at least, in really good historical fiction, there isn't necessarily a clear antagonist. And that's because often history is too complicated to have one bad guy. I did read one novel recently that I really liked, The Alice Network, and that did have a very clear antagonist, this, you know, mustache twirling evil child rapist, essentially. But he was, as everyone else was saying, he was so evil that he wasn't really interesting. So I wouldn't give that as an example of an antagonist that I liked. Often the antagonist is something more vague, like society. Like, for example, the book I most recently loved, The Danish Girl by David Abershoff. It's about the first woman, the first transgender woman, so man to undergo gender reassignment surgery, as they called it then. So there was no antagonist. There was nobody trying to stop her from becoming who she wanted to be. But it was an incredibly compelling story because she was fighting against her own fears, society's preconceptions, and all of those things like that. So I guess I'm going to take the non-answer to say there doesn't even have to be an antagonist, but the character needs to be striving against something complicated.
I see your friend there with you. Who's that?
This is Tico. She's the world's most maddening cat because she absolutely will not get off my lap when I'm sitting down. And yet, heaven help us, if anybody in our household try to touch her at any other time, it's impossible. She'll run away.
Looks a little like Winnie.
Aww.
That's super cute. Wait, Carrie, I want to see your cat. Pull up again. How cute. Okay, we're getting distracted by cats. It's fine. Okay, so the next question is from Emmy Bond. And this is an interesting one because I think a lot of adults and NA potential mentees have this question. And it's, what if your novel could be adult or new adult? And kind of what is the difference? And then if it could be either of those, how do you query since there are no personalized queries? So Heather, we'll start with you.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. Can you kind of repeat that?
It's okay. There's a lot of cute cats going around, so I understand.
I was thinking about my dog and where he was at and my kids upstairs, so go ahead.
So the question is, if your novel, what if your novel could be adult or new adult? And maybe talk, I think it would be good for each mentor to maybe talk a little bit about the difference between those two. And if it could be either, how do you query since there are no personalized queries?
Okay, this is where your good research comes into play when you're researching your mentors. There are some mentors who do not want new adult, but they want adult. So, you could kind of play it either way, depending on the situations of your characters. I would say your characters, like, who are just in college, that's genuinely, if it's a college setting especially, that's genuinely the new adult. There is that coming of age, time right after college too, that's kind of considered new adult. And though new adult is not really, there's so many people up in the air about, is it good? Is it, should you just queer it as adult? I think it all just depends on your feelings, your gut. My book that was released is actually classified as new adult still. So, I mean, yes, most of the time it's romance that's selling as new adult, but you just kind of have to go with your gut. As far as choosing what to query it as, it goes to which agents want what, which mentors want what. It's just a personal preference is how you want to query it, I would say, and submit it to mentors. I hope I made sense. Gosh.
I don't personally have a lot of familiarity with new adult. I think, as Heather was saying, it might be found more in the romance category. I don't know if I've seen it compared with a literary fiction book, for example. But I don't have a lot to share here, so I'm just going to pass this question.
I went ahead, on my wish list, what I said was I don't know a lot about new adult. I've read mixed things about that category, but look, if you walk into the Barnes & Noble, there's no shelf that says new adult. I don't really know what that means, to be honest. However, I absolutely love a great young adult book with adult themes. And I give some examples on my wish list, like I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, or Sex and Violence by Carrie Callaghan, anything by Meg Rossoff that's young adult. There is some very sophisticated young adult, and anything like that, for this program, I would consider new adult because of the themes and the content. But having said that, it doesn't matter what you would call it necessarily. You know, I would probably, if I chose a story like that, work with the person to figure out what's the best way to describe this book to get an agent interested. You know, it's important to know how you're going to market the book.
I'm only asking for adults, so if I get any submissions that are classified as new adult, I will take a look at them as if they were adults, or unless it's clear that it's not appropriate for me, like a romance submission, I'm not considering romances at all. If I get something like that, then I would just disregard it. But otherwise, I think for me, it just means adult. That's all I know. And if you're looking for someone who's actually a new adult mentor, then I would not be a right fit because I don't know anything about it, and you don't want that.
Yeah, and I mean, since I'm looking for historical, I'm not sure that new adult is a thing in historical fiction. It's not that I'm aware of. So I would, like Carrie, I would just treat it as adult. I wouldn't really differentiate between the two of them, I suppose. At least in historical. I don't know much about, like in contemporary romance, I wouldn't know much about that.
Yeah, great. I think you guys answered that really well. There's another question from Twitter from Jeff Just Writes, and he asks, how important is suspension for an adult manuscript? Which I think is another way of kind of asking of how important maybe is believability. Yeah, so the original question is, how important is suspension of disbelief for you in an adult manuscript? Yeah, so possibly metafiction, or possibly talking about believability, or maybe general strangeness. I don't know, you can answer it however you like. Katrina, we'll start with you.
I think this really depends on category. I think a strong story that's told well can convince the reader pretty much of anything. But if the writer is asking, you know, can I start this premise with these pretty wild assumptions, and will you buy into that? It totally depends on the world you're setting up. If you're writing literary fiction that's set in our kind of modern world, but you're asking to suspend a lot of disbelief about things, then it sounds like you're almost writing satire or spec fic or a different category. So I think if there's a lot of elements that don't seem to fit with our current world, but it's being queried as if the things should fit with our current world, then that might be a miscategorization of the genre of the manuscript, which probably would just read as pretty confusing in something as short as a query letter and short pitch. So maybe think about reassessing the genre you're querying it as, if that's causing problems for you with CPs, for example. Hopefully before the submission window so that you can send it to the right people.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. I didn't quite understand the question, but I think anytime you're reading fiction, you're suspending your disbelief, if that was the question, to some degree with anything that you're inventing. For example, in my book, it's a serious family drama, but it's also narrated from the point of view of a cat, which of course you have to suspend your disbelief to some degree to go along with that. Either you buy it or you don't. And within a few pages, you're going to know if you buy it or you can't accept it. So you know, you could almost look at that as a bit of a magical element, but it's not, I would never describe the book that way at all, because it's actually, you know, it's a serious story about a family struggling with the mother has mental illness, and it's just, the cat's meant to be a sort of, in a way, a stand-in for the way a child would see the world, where she understands most of what's going on, but not everything. And some really interesting books, like The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, you know, that's narrated by a teenager with autism, and you have to suspend your disbelief to some degree to go along thinking of him writing this book. And, you know, it could be a very creative, you know, way to go about things. But I guess that's part of every story that you read, I would think.
I think that most readers are going into the experience of reading looking to suspend our disbelief. And that's the magic of narrative and the appeal for many people of reading. And so that's certainly what I'm looking for as a mentor. I want a story that makes me forget what's going on around me and really immerses me in the story. I'm not a huge fan of metafiction that's constantly reminding me that I'm reading fiction, or even satire that's, you know, maybe poking fun at itself or at me, the reader. Those books have their place, absolutely, in the marketplace, and they can be incredibly successful. I'm just not the person for it. And that's, you know, what subjectivity is all about. So.
I heard at some writing conference, one of the speakers said, you only get one lie, or you get your one big lie. So if your big lie is that the Nazis won World War II, then the rest of your story needs to convince the reader that it's all true, if that makes sense. And so I think that that holds pretty true. You know, you can get away with sort of one big, like, let's look at something a little differently. But if you have too many things in there that don't add up, a lot of times readers are going to have trouble, or they'll get frustrated. I'll get frustrated, you know, personally, if I'm reading something that has too many things in it. I just have trouble believing those things would happen. But some of it I do think depends on genre. And so even within historical, so if I'm looking at just historical fiction, I'm going to want to see that it's pretty accurate. I'm going to have trouble believing things that are really fantastical, like if the king is dressing up as Batman at night and going out and saving people in the street, I'm probably going to have trouble believing that. But if it's an alternative history or a historical fantasy or something along those lines, it's going to be easier for me to say this, and let's let the king dress up as Batman and go save people, or, you know, whatever it is that is a little bit more out there. So I do think it depends on the story. If it's done well, you can carry your reader along and get them to believe in a lot of things that maybe they need to enjoy the story.
Okay, great. So here's a slightly different question for you guys. What is your personal philosophy, I guess, when it comes to revising, or what are your personal strategies for revising? Sandi, we'll start with you.
Sure. Do you mean revising my own work, or helping someone else with, or just in general, I guess?
Yeah, I guess in general. I think you can answer both if you like. How do you feel about revising, or what are some of your beliefs about revising? And then you can kind of taper into how you would address it as helping someone as a mentor.
Okay. Well, basically, I am editing everything repeatedly up until the very last minute. With my books, I get the first draft out very quickly, and then I revise over and over and drive everyone crazy, my agent, my editor, because I want everything to be perfect, and it's never perfect. You know, you can edit forever. And I think it's important to be really open to everyone's suggestions and to be willing to go in. I once rewrote an entire novel from a different character's point of view because I realized it really needed to be done. And I spend a lot more time revising and editing than I do actually writing the first draft. Having said that, if I were working with someone else, I know my weaknesses and the things that I generally need to look for when I'm writing, and hopefully, if I was looking at someone's entire novel, I'd be looking to help them primarily with the big picture things, like making sure each chapter has a beginning, middle, and an end, and that every scene is important and moves the plot forward. And looking at, I think like the big picture things are the most important versus line editing. You can always get help doing that later. But I think in terms of this program, I'd be mostly hopefully helping someone look at the big picture of the whole story.
Like Sandi, I really put a lot of effort into the editing and the revision process. I think that is for many writers where the rubber meets the road, and you need to be completely fearless there. Or actually maybe ruthless would be a better word, because there's going to be a lot of cutting and a lot of restructuring possibly, at least in my work. Speaking now to my experience of mentoring folks and how I envision helping someone with their revisions, the first stage, I think, is getting a really good picture of what your novel looks like, particularly for someone who is more of a pantser. I think it's important to take a step back and outline your novel if you haven't already done so, and think about each chapter and how that plays into the entire conflict, the character arcs, and things like that. And so then we would start, if necessary, it obviously depends on the project, but start with revisions on that level, trying to see the whole thing and think about how we can get every piece of that puzzle to fit in to the narrative arc. I've been pretty, like I said earlier, ruthless in terms of asking my mentees examples of what I asked folks to do last year. Cut an entire POV. There was one novel that was written in dual POV, and I convinced my poor hapless mentee that one of those needed to go. And so she, amazing woman that she is, rewrote the entire half of that from the perspective of the other main POV, whose story it really was. We've also looked closely at character arcs, re-examined motivation really deeply to think about why is this character doing that, added entire new chapters, taken out chapters that didn't make sense, and things like that. So that's kind of the big and the medium picture level, and I think that's where we're going to be focusing on in Pitch Wars. Of course, then there is the line edits, but like Sandi said, I think oftentimes the writer can find time to do it on their own, particularly in the really tight timeline of Pitch Wars, which is just 2 months.
Yeah, I used to hate revision. I loved the writing part, and even I knew revision was important, and I spent a lot of time on it, but I hated it. And now I love it. Now I almost enjoy it more than the writing part. And I think that's because I've learned the tools that I need to go in. It's not just looking at this and thinking, okay, this is kind of a steaming pile of crap. What do I do with it? Now I go in and say, okay, I know what to do with it. I know how to look at scenes. I know how to look at character arcs and things like that, and how to make them stronger. And so with my mentee, that's what I'll be trying to do as well, is help give them those tools, or if they know those tools already, help them to polish more what they already have. I would go through the entire manuscript and look at those big arcs. Do we have a strong character arc for the main character and for any side characters that have a significant story? Is the plot have a strong arc all the way through, so there's not sagging parts in it? And then from there, I would look at more detail, more of the scenes, more of the individual parts of it, and fine-tune those a little bit more. So whoever I work with can count on going through their entire manuscript pretty thoroughly, at least twice, to make sure that both what I think of as the big picture and then the small detail things are where they should be.
Since this year I'll be having a co-mentor, both of us are going, it's like a 2-for-1. That's what we say. We're both going to be looking for probably different, different things, and combining our notes every time we read something, a submission. And we're going to be probably focusing on like the character development and whether each scene flows, each chapter flows. I mean, everything I say is pretty much what everyone else says, but that, they had a good, good plans as to what they're going to do. And I think last year, my mentor, I had her cutting some scenes, and then I had her adding scenes, and I think I had her add an epilogue, and it really just depends on what each manuscript, what it needs. But overall, we're going to work on the big picture. And then, I think we'll do like 1-line edit, but like somebody else said, it's just, those aren't as important as the big picture and the developmental and the content of the story. And as far as my own personal revision goes and my editing, I hate it. That's all I gotta say. I hate editing, so.
So I used to work as an editor for some magazines, and I really love it. So editing is my favorite part of the process. Sometimes it's a lot more fun for me than raw drafting. But in terms of working with a mentee, I think, echoing what everyone has said already, for the contest purposes, I think it's most efficient to focus on big picture, the flow of things. I like to think about the tension for each plot thread in a story and making sure that things are rising and falling at a pace that keeps the reader always engaged. So I do a lot of mapping of threads of tension for my own novels, and I think that's a pretty useful tool in terms of making sure that the tension in all the different plot lines doesn't sag all at once. There's that kind of notorious middle part of the book where everything kind of slows down. So thinking about books at the kind of higher level of how do you keep an interesting rhythm and tension and make sure there's always something that's keeping the reader engaged. That would be kind of how I'd approach the first pass with the mentee, and then we'd work from there as needed for their specific manuscript.
Okay, awesome. I think that's a lot of good advice and strategies. I think we have time for one more round of questions, or answers rather, and I am going to ask you guys to give, if you could give all these potential mentees who are watching one final piece of advice, what would you tell them? And we will start with you, Carrie, if that's okay.
Sure. I am a never-ending font of advice for other writers, as obnoxious as that may be to my future mentee. I think the most important thing is to constantly remind yourself why you love writing. It's easy to get distracted by the contest, by the desire to get the next thing, whether that next thing is an agent or a book deal or a best-selling list position or an award or whatever. And I think all of that sort of never-ending scale of desire, to put it in kind of a Buddhist way, is ultimately futile. And you're just going to end up being frustrated if you can't remind yourself why you're doing this to begin with. And, you know, honestly, the reality is that not all of us are going to be Pulitzer Prize winning authors, but all of us are writers, and we have to enjoy that and remember why we love it. So that's it. And if anybody ever needs a reminder for why you love it, come talk to me and I'll pull it out of you.
I think kind of along the lines of what Carrie is saying, I think one of the biggest things, one of the most important things is to find the thing that you have to say that nobody else can say in the same way that you can, because everybody has their own story, everybody has their own, the reasons that they write and the things that they have to say, their experiences that other people maybe don't understand but can understand if you tell that story, if you get that story out there. So I think that's the big thing. It goes along with the reason you love to write, finding that reason and keep telling that story. And the more you keep working on the craft, on improving yourself, and the more you write, the more it's going to help you to to tell that story that only you can tell, or those stories that only you can tell, and to get those perspectives out there. And I think those go together. I think that determination to keep going, which you have to have, because there's going to be times that it just sucks. Even when it seems like things are going well, there's ups and downs. But if you have that drive, that sense of that thing that you have to offer, that no one else can tell your story, the story that you need to tell. If you have that, I think it's going to help you to keep going and to get through those rough spots.
My one piece of advice would probably be find your crew of people, find your CPs, find your betas, find your writing friends, because not only are you going to need somebody to help you look through your book and tell you what you're doing right or wrong, but you're going to need somebody to vent to when, you know, things are down and things look hopeless, like you're never going to finish this book, or you're never going to find a publishing house, or you're never going to find an agent. You need somebody who's been there and can relate to that with you. And that, to me, I don't know what I would do without my writing friends, because obviously my husband doesn't understand and my kids don't understand, but my writing friends get it. And that is my biggest advice, is find that crew.
I really love everybody's answers so far. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. I think what I could add to that would be, publishing is a long, slow road. So keep going, keep writing, take breaks when you need to. I mean, when things get hard and you've gotten a lot of rejections or whatever's going on, like some days you don't write every day. Some weeks you don't write for, you know, sometimes months. And it doesn't mean that you've stopped or you've failed. But it just takes a long, long time for most of us. And you've got to keep showing up and just have some faith in yourself. And the fact that you do have a special story to tell, as Evie said, there's something that only you can say. And you've got to just keep trying to say it till the right person hears it and takes you up the next step of the ladder.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said so far. I think it's all very good advice. And along those lines, I would say my advice would be to just keep going. If you love to write, just write for yourself. I think everyone with a published book has many stories of rejection, of trying to find their agent and trying to find the right publishing house. And probably most of us have several unpublished novels that never went anywhere, but sometimes, you know, maybe that first novel doesn't make it, but maybe your next one or your third one or your fourth one will be the one that really works. And, you know, if you're the kind of person who would just write and publish online for free and enjoy it, you know, I think, you know, that's the kind of person who's probably going to really be successful, is someone who just keeps at it. And I wish everyone luck with the contest.
Yeah, all of that advice is really great. All of these mentors are great. I almost wish that I had an adult fantasy manuscript that I could sub to them, just so that I could get like all of this advice constantly. That is all the time that we have for our live chat. If we didn't answer your question, you can still ask it on the Ask Mentor hashtag, and probably someone will answer it there. I also put all the names of the mentors in the info box at the bottom. I don't know what that's called, but the like information area under the video, so that you can look up the mentors if you want to learn more about them. And otherwise, thank you for everyone for watching, and thank you for to our amazing 5 mentors for all their great advice and wisdom. So everybody wave, because we're done. Okay, see you guys.